Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another freaking sweet episode of The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And here's your host, Alan Mosley.
I feel like you've built this one up too much already.
I was excited to say that.
We're not even 10 seconds in the episode. You've already built it up too much. But that's okay. Welcome back to The Gold Standard. I am your host, Alan Mosley. And remember, as always, if you want to catch us on social media, it's facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. You can follow me on Twitter, which is @AlanMMosley, but I really don't recommend it because I just say incendiary things.
Yeah, you know.
But you don't have to do any of that because you could just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
Yes,
As
sir.
a really quick note,
Yeah.
our webmaster, who is our good friend and a liberty lover himself, Robert Nellinger, he will be on the program here in a week or two.
Cool.
Rob
Awesome.
is the third member of our Gold Standard team.
Yeah.
He's never appeared on camera.
Yeah.
He will now, which means his life will be ruined.
Awesome.
And it'll never be erased from the internet. But
Hey,
that's
it's an
okay.
experience, let me tell
He'll
you.
be with us. So you have that to look forward to. But let me tell you what you have to look forward to today. We have an awesome guest. Our guest today is the legendary Jim Bovard, who is I said legendary.
There he
So, and so now, Jim, I've built you up to an impossible level, so we'll both just fail together. What do you say about that?
All right, so far so good.
All right. Well, I don't want to waste a lot of time talking about the 18 million different periodicals your writing has been featured in, because that would be the whole episode. But USA Today, Wall Street Journal, definitely publications like you will see The Gold Standard from time to time in, Libertarian Institute, Mises.org, all sorts of good ones. But I want to jump right into it because there's so much to talk about. So first of all, before we do that, Jim, how are you doing?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, we are so glad to have you on. We just talked right before we started the episode. The warm glow of Edward Snowden is looking down upon us as we're speaking in real time. I like that a lot.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm still hoping to get hired as an interior designer, but maybe my chances aren't too good.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. I had to recently fill out a survey for a Secret Santa, and one of the questions on the survey was, what is your home/decor style? So that maybe that would be
Rustic.
the present.
Rustic is the term I like to use.
Rustic? Oh,
Rustic, yeah.
I should have done that. So mine was just man.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I mean,
that's good.
Yeah, which really that also just substitutes for none of the above, probably. But something
I've always stressed is that people should have low expectations of journalists. I mean, as far as their office, their space, their beards, low expectations. That's the way to go.
Now that's interesting. See, we're not even going to talk about politics today. So, Jim, I used to run a printing. Yeah, good, right? I used to run a printing business before doing something stupid like doing this show. And my office was a total mess. I mean, we just had stacks of paper and shavings and whatnot just all over the place. But I used to tell people when they would comment, "Hey, you should really clean up because this doesn't look like Staples or Office Max." As I would say, no, the printer you need to look out for is the one who doesn't have a mess, because that means they're not doing any work.
That's a good line. I'll certainly try to plagiarize that.
Well, there you go. Well, if no one can say that I didn't give something back to Jim Bovard, because Jim Bovard has given so much to us. Just as recently, we'll actually just skip forward to that one. Just as recently as just a week or two ago, I wrote an article for Fee that was titled to do not shame people who don't vote. I actually wanted the line abstinence only voter education, but they wouldn't go with that. They said don't shame non-vote.
That's sad.
Don't you think that was better?
Oh,
yeah.
You got robbed.
Well, it was in the article, but they didn't think that was a good enough tagline. So, well.
Yeah.
That's okay. But part of my article where I was talking about just the absurdity of the voting system, I actually quoted from you from an article that you wrote, and it came back on November 1st, is we need a #MeToo movement for political consent. So describe for our audience a little bit, because I'm sure everyone at this point is familiar with the Me Too movement, but how do you equate the Me Too movement and political consent?
Well, I mean, it's important for people to recognize that that voting often involves getting screwed, and so once you have that baseline, you might not be so proud about going around with those little, buttons on you, buttons on your shirt after you go there. Even though there was a place nearby that gave free slices of pizza for election day for people who voted. I mean, just my luck, I didn't vote this year. But the whole idea of Me Too is that folks are, a lot of activists are trying to do is change the definition of sexual consent. And certainly if some guy's a rapist or if some woman's a rapist, uses force or deadly threats, okay, yeah, I mean, that's, that's immoral and criminal. But what we need to do is also look at the question of political consent, because basically most elections, how it works is if someone has a choice of two candidates, then the person can't complain about getting screwed afterwards. It's like you're forced to consent to someone who the political parties put on the ballot. I mean, something we found out from WikiLeaks was that in 2016, the Democratic National Committee completely rigged the Democratic primaries to make sure that Hillary Clinton would win. And she was one of the two main choices on the ballot that last presidential election. So, I mean, was it a free choice? It was rigged. And not only that, but the whole idea of what the founding fathers had was it would be limited consent. It would be consent to choose this or that politician to do specified things, as opposed to choosing a dictator for the next 4 years or the next 2 years for the House. But the whole idea of the Bill of Rights was to put a limit to basically stop politicians from going out and molesting people for their entire term in office, but it hasn't worked so well.
Well, Jim, for viewers of this show will know that I like to ask really open-ended rhetorical questions that are impossible to answer. So I'm going to give you one right now.
Answer is no.
Perfect.
I'm sorry.
Well, one thing that I kind of wrestle with is, and we're libertarians on this program. I'm really more of an anarchist, so I don't debate the Constitution often. I understand the value of it as a tool for restraint, but that's not typically in my wheelhouse. But with that said, it seems like when someone like yourself or me says something along the lines of, well, the system's broken, people are choosing between bad options, but in a lot of ways people are propagating that system by continuing to buy into identity politics, to left versus right, us versus them. In a way, you're sort of calling everyone hypocrites, right? Because you're saying, well, everyone wants a better, freer country, but you're not voting for better or free, so you're hypocrites. So it seems like that's a self-defeating political strategy, right? Because it's combative.
Yeah, I was not calling everybody hypocrites. I mean, there are lots of hypocrites. There's lots of folks who are misguided, but there are some folks who would actually like to put a damn leash on the politicians. There was a wonderful old saying from about 50 or 60 years ago that to the effect that the Constitution isn't perfect, but it's better than what we've got now. And the whole idea of a Bill of Rights, which is basically marking off territory that politicians are not allowed to hose down, I mean, it's a good idea. Again, it hasn't worked so well, but if you see some of the overt hostility on Capitol Hill to the constitutional rights, it's always been my hope that would wake people up. It's woken up some people, not enough so far.
But it seems almost like I agree with you that there's a lot of people who will say things like they want to put a leash on politicians. But what I'm afraid is that they don't mean their own politicians. They mean your politicians. They mean politicians from other districts or other states. Because, of course, it's never my representative that destroyed America. It's all of the other people. It's the other party. It's the other parts of the country. So what do you say to those folks?
Well, excuse me. Well, I think there's a lot of liberals who would favor the First Amendment, especially things like freedom of the press, for their candidates, for their representatives, for their senators, and for all the others. Likewise, there's a lot of conservatives who favor the Second Amendment, not just for their own, for other, other areas, but for themselves as well. So there are lots of folks who are in favor of specific freedoms. Part of the frustration is a lot of people not added together that, for instance, if someone's in favor of the Second Amendment, you also need to have a very strong Fourth Amendment to prohibit the unreasonable searches and seizures. And that's something that a lot of conservatives either have been blind on or, simply they have too much affection for the drug war to see how, basically giving politicians the right to pat everybody down. Oh, well, that's a handgun. Okay, so you're going to prison for 2 years, even though you've done no violence and done no harm to anybody.
Sure.
Right.
I would almost kind of liken that to the Fourth Amendment. It's sort of gone the way of some of the what I like to call the later amendments, in that it's not mainstream discussion. Like First Amendment, it'll be hard for you to find people that are just openly and viciously anti-First Amendment, right? And granted,
I guess you haven't spent much time in college campuses.
Well,
lately.
that's very true, but they don't see it that way. They think that they are protecting the First Amendment by attacking, because it's always the other, right?
Yeah.
I'm fighting the other
people
person.
They disagree with, so they hate them.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly.
And it's their right to hate them.
Would you say that that surveillance and issues with the Fourth Amendment is I don't know if most overlooked, but is one of the most pressing issues today?
Well, absolutely, and it's been frustrating to me to see how easy it is for politicians to vilify people like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange or others who have helped expose government crimes. It's like there's so much hostility towards Snowden, even though, he was not the one who was massively violating federal law and the Constitution. But, you had top politicians joke about killing him. You had top federal officials talk about that. And it's like, and folks say, well, but he ran off to Russia. Well, he's still alive. Perhaps because he did flee. And if you look at what happened to Julian Assange, that's what happens when you don't flee. So, no, I mean, the Fourth Amendment, I was, 25 years ago when I was researching lost rights, I was fascinated to see a number of law professors and others who did a beautiful job of highlighting the importance and principle of the Fourth Amendment, which I'd read a little bit about, but I wasn't really that savvy on. But to see how it's laid out, and if you look at the history of the U.S. in post 9/11, if you see how far the TSA is allowed to go with their pat downs. I mean, I've had 1 or 2 flashes at TSA checkpoints. Okay, maybe more. But the whole idea that the TSA screeners have some kind of God-given right to jam you in the groin, or for females to squeeze their breasts, oh, no bomb here, honk, honk. This is complete BS as far as the Fourth Amendment. There is no need for these searches. TSA has never explained why this is either legal or necessary, and TSA screws up everything it touches. So it's like, okay, so they're not going to keep us safe, and they're also going to squeeze our butts and balls and boobs. So where's the profit?
Well, exactly. One thing that we harp about a lot on this show is that it's always good to have, just with any argument, it's always good to have lots of different points, right? So even if we don't share the same foundational principles on the Constitution, on natural rights, on a slew of other things, let's look at some more of the practical applications. So you brought up the TSA. Now, for moral, ethical, and every other reason, I think the TSA should be abolished 5 seconds from now. But even in a world where the TSA exists, and even under the presumption that we need something for safety, they do a terrible job, right? You see all the studies done where their percentage rate of actually catching unauthorized, weapons, bombs in mock circumstances, they catch almost nothing. And we shouldn't be surprised by this, right? Because the government is terrible at everything they do.
Yeah, well, it's silly that they have a hiring process that if someone has a 3-digit IQ, then they're disqualified. There was a story which I did last month for USA Today, and it was, TSA encourages people, if they have a problem, if you got a complaint, just write it down and send it in. Well, TSA makes it very difficult for journalists or others to get copies of those complaints through the Freedom of Information Act, which, FOIA as the TSA uses it is basically the Fuck Off Information Act, because it's very difficult to get information. It's fine if you want to beat that.
No. That's staying in. Yes.
That's staying in. Okay, so something which I did, I was, I'd seen complaints from women, so I went on Twitter and did Twitter searches, and let's do TSA vagina, let's do TSA vulva, TSA labia, and there were all these very specific complaints from female travelers about how the TSA had sexually abused them, and it's shocking stuff, but almost nobody in Washington is paying attention. Instead, they just get away with this, and every year or two, TSA promises to clean up its act, and it's like, hey, I'm still sitting here on the edge of my chair.
Well, let me ask you this, going back to open rhetorical questions.
Okay, it's going to be another rough one.
If now Justice Kavanaugh had been 100% verified, proven to have done to Christine Ford what the TSA does to those women, would that have constituted in the minds of the public at large that he was guilty?
Yes. If you look at the details, there was one woman, I think she was traveling out of one of the New York airports. She was complaining that a TSA screener had hit her vulva 4 times. I mean, just thump, 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 thump. I mean, it's not supposed to be a BDSM experience when you go through a TSA checkpoint, but for a lot of women, it has been. And I've had bad experiences there. I mean, I was coming out of Portland, actually Thanksgiving 3 years ago, and I made the acquaintance of a TSA screener who tried to turn my family jewels into a pancake. Whoa. Now, that was something that's like, okay, I can write about this. Most people don't have that option, but and it's the folks who do this, they're still in the payroll. I mean, the TSA doesn't fire. A TSA has fired over 500 screeners or employees who they caught stealing. But as far as physically abusing travelers, not a problem, because the TSA can't admit that without basically opening a huge Pandora's box that would show the agency's doing a whole lot more abuse than what people think.
Now, I want to switch gears here for a second. You had mentioned Julian Assange along with Edward Snowden just a few minutes ago, and I have your column here from just the 20th. Julian Assange deserves a Medal of Freedom, not a secret indictment. And this is coming on the heels of some of what kind of lit up the Twitter sphere and whatnot recently, where and fill in the information for this for me, that the authorities inadvertently showed the world that there are charges either pending, filed, or awaiting his inevitable exile from the embassy there that he's been staying in for how long now? How long's Julian been in there?
Quite a few years.
Yeah, and so, but the naysayers would say that this is all just pomp and circumstance, right? Julian could walk out the front doors tomorrow and nothing's going to happen to him, you crazy conspiracy theorist kook. He won't be black bagged and sent off to Guantanamo just because you anti-government nuts say so. But it certainly seems quite the contrary, you would agree.
Yeah, well, there was what happened was late last week, somebody was going through some court filings that the Justice Department had done, I think in the Eastern District of Virginia, and someone noticed that someone had copied and pasted a paragraph from another case which made a reference to a secret federal indictment of Julian Assange. And this is something that the government had not admitted, and all of a sudden it's like, oops. But this is, as the New York Times said, this is a drastic escalation of the federal efforts against WikiLeaks and Assange. and it puts him in the legal crosshairs. We don't know the details of what he's actually been indicted on or what, if any, evidence there is. But it certainly looks like that the feds are trying to take him out legally. The CIA chief, Mike Pompeo, had said WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence service, and said that Assange was a fraud, coward, and enemy. I think these folks are biased against him.
You could say such a thing. Now, of course, Mike Pompeo, who really is just a delight all the way around.
He's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, right? And perfectly in time for the holiday season, no less. But there's two words that stood out from his statement that really kind of grind in the back of my head, and that's hostile and enemy. Because isn't that sort of the MO, that if you can paint someone as a hostile or an enemy, now they've taken on the visage of a combatant now? They're not just a concerned citizen, they're a combatant. And you know full well what we do with combatants.
Mm-hmm. Well, if someone exposes government crimes, aren't they a criminal? I mean, that seems to be the mindset. It's interesting. The comments on the USA Today article webpage are almost all hostile to Assange and or to me. Just people. There was someone who was saying that Assange should be, indicted and convicted for treason. I don't think people from Australia took an oath to the U.S. government, so it's a little tricky to get him on treason. But there's so much free-floating hatred, basically, and some of the people in the administration have stirred that up. Mike Pompeo in the front line, and there's a lot of people who've never forgiven him for exposing war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a lot of liberals have never forgiven him for exposing the emails from John Podesta and the Democratic National Committee. Even though, a lot of the media is saying, well, he was a Russian operative. We don't know where those emails came from, especially the ones from the Democratic National Committee. Some folks I respect have looked at the timeline for how those were uploaded or taken out, and it's like it wasn't it was something which had to be done very quickly, which would indicate it's more likely to be on a USB instead of breaking in online. So.
Would you say that? Yeah. No, invite them on the show. This could be good. Believe it or not, in our last episode was the first episode we ever did where we were right in the middle of the episode and we had someone call in, and that actually was Mike Meharry.
That's awesome.
And so we did a Pee Wee Herman where we said, "Oh, there's a call, let's answer it." And of course, it happened to be one of our friends, and he was wearing a USF Bulls sweatshirt and unkempt hair. But frankly, that was our best episode. So don't you worry about it. So just so you know, we don't edit anything. This goes straight on.
It's straight in, man.
So don't worry about it.
But I was being so careful with my language to this point.
Yeah, right? Well, so another question I want to ask you is that I know what the answer is, but I want to throw you a softball. I mean, how much does it concern you that the news cycle will chew on Podesta emails, a week, a couple of weeks. The news cycle will chew on Iraq or Afghanistan and whatever may have been uncovered a week or 2 weeks. But the rancor for the whistleblower lives on.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, there's a lot of people. It's unfortunate that it's easy for some politicians to transfer the anger that should be directed to the government, put that on the person that blew the whistle. We especially saw that with Edward Snowden.
Yes,
because he was a hero, and he's someone who blew the roof off several government agencies, and had a very positive effect. I was disappointed that there wasn't a whole lot stronger backlash against the abuses, but Edward Snowden did great work, and people like Glenn Greenwald, who helped him get the information out, and some of the other activists. Some of the people in Hong Kong that helped him hide, they were great. So, but no, it's just, part of the trouble right now is that there's just so much hatred in politics.
Yes.
I was down at I did a story for USA Today. There were about 24 white nationalists or nitwits, whatever you want to call them, who had a protest in D.C. in August. It was run by one of the same nitwits who did the thing in Charlottesville last year, and there were thousands of counter-protesters. So I went down there and wrote about it and got some photographs, and there was just so much free-floating hatred, and it was funny. Some of the editorial cartoons have tried to present like, okay, here's these white nationalists who represent hatred, and then there's the counter-protesters who represent love, and I'm thinking like, well, they weren't there. Because, okay, there were a small number of folks who were not full of venom, but this free-floating hatred towards almost everything. Some of the signs I saw that day, it almost made me cynical.
Yeah, almost. Well,
Almost.
Thank God you came out of it on the other side.
That's why I'm here.
Now, I saw a program that you did. I believe you were on Mises Weekends with Jeff Deist a little while back, and you guys were talking about just the politicization of everything and kind of the trend that's taken. And it's not so much that I have any pushback, more than just my own little take on it, which is, but this isn't a recent trend, though, right? Like, would you really say that the world has been made a new and a poisonous political environment circa November 2017, or would you say that no, we've been heading this way for some time?
Well, there's a wonderful line from historian Henry Adams from a century ago, and he said that politics is a systematic organization of hatreds.
Ooh.
And that was something which Woodrow Wilson did during the First World War. He stirred up a vast amount of hatred towards Germans and German Americans. It's something that a lot of Southern politicians did it to shore up Jim Crow laws. You had a lot of other politicians have done it. President Obama did it in some ways. Trump certainly is playing that card as far as some groups of immigrants or would-be immigrants. So it's an old tactic. I think it's become more intense, and it's interesting. Some of the folks who I run into here in the D.C. area, hatred has become a form of virtue signaling. And folks are proud of how much venom they have for Trump or for, in some cases, for the left-wing Democrats or for people who are, people who are wearing a Make America Great hat again. There's a lot of places, if you show up wearing a hat like that, you're going to have someone try to physically assault you. And the people that do that are going to act like they're doing God's work. It's just sad that the old virtue of tolerance, it seems to become less appreciated.
Do you think?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do you think that it's going to get better, or is it going to get worse?
Now, if I know Jim Bovard, he's going to think things are turning the corner right as we speak.
Just curious. You think that there's hope, man?
I'm proud to be an optimist.
Yeah,
it's Thanksgiving. You got to be positive.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's just there were a lot of people who looked at the hatred of the 2016 presidential campaign and thought, okay, this is finally burned out. Trump is elected, and as soon as Trump gets wins the election, it was the Russians, and I'm still waiting to see the evidence on that because it's pretty damn thin so far. I don't know. I mean, it's just, but take a couple steps back. This whole idea of hatred is a virtue signaling. And I just, first of all, the whole idea of virtue signaling makes me gag. And then to be, waving your hatred in the air like it's a sign of being God's chosen. I mean, what is this? I mean, it's horrible for people's mental health. There have been some stories about how since Trump was elected, you got a lot more people needing sleeping pills and antidepressants and therapy. And I'm thinking like, no, I should not be too rude here. But it's unfortunate that folks cannot put a firewall in their own lives and to not be consumed by their own political anger. There was a wonderful line from Shakespeare. Shakespeare said that people should be careful not to heat a furnace for your foe so hot that it singes yourself. And that's what's happened politically to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Not libertarians, of course.
No.
Doesn't happen to them.
If there's anybody that I just know have all the right answers, it's libertarians. I don't even want to go down.
Life.
Yeah, I don't want to go down that. But we already take enough heat on this show as it is because I make fun of the LP constantly and deserve.
No, I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
Right. Well, I mean, but to be fair, I haven't made
Bill
fun.
Well doesn't get the respect he deserves.
Well, I was just about to say I make fun of the LP all the time, but I haven't made fun of a libertarian yet. So I'll let you decipher that statement for yourself. But one thing I really like that the 10th Amendment Center had out recently is that whataboutisms. If there's one thing that I hate more than anything, like virtue signaling is bad, but I've decided the thing I hate most is whataboutisms. Is that if I say to you, well, Jim, you stepped on my toe. And you say, well, what about that time you stepped on mine? Well, that doesn't address my point at all. It's a whataboutism. And so what you hear is that, well, Trump is literally Hitler. Well, Obama, he's doing something, and Trump supporters will say, well, Obama did it. Well, okay.
That doesn't justify anything.
Is that an argument? How is President X is doing a bad thing? How is an appropriate argument? Well, President Y did it too. Like what? How old do you have to be to understand that's not an argument?
Well, the thing I'm sitting here trying to be polite is that I don't know why you'd expect people to use intelligent, coherent, principled arguments that had even a whiff of logic. I mean, This is politics, so they just throw dirt. I mean, There were some stories which I did last year on Obama. And I was, vilified because, well, what about Trump? I'm thinking and then I've criticized Trump and said, different people come back and say, well, you're a hypocrite because President Obama did this. I'm thinking geez,
yes,
there's no way to win.
Yes, Jim, you're the hypocrite. You make sure that you understand
absolutely.
You're the one.
Well, I mean, there's so much free-floating hatred. I mean, and it's interesting how there are some subjects which you touch, which I've touched, and it's like an absolute volcano, and there's so much vitriol, and I'm sitting here and thinking, well, I thought that was a funny line. Mm-hmm. Anyhow.
Yeah. Well, I've told a number of my friends already. I've written a whopping 3 articles in my life. I have had all 3 published, so I'm batting 1,000. Yeah. But I've written a whopping 3 articles, so I'm right on your heels, Jim. I've written 3, so I'm right on your heels. But I've told people that I actually write my article around the zingers. I just come up with a joke and then make up an article around the joke. I thought that was a normal way of writing. Am I wrong?
It's a good way to do it if you have good jokes.
Okay. So what you're telling me is it's not a good way to do it.
No.
No walking into bars, man. No walking into bar jokes.
It's a very good thing to aspire to humor because, especially most wrong in politics, it's like, oh my God, okay, where's the I need some amphetamines. I need some double dose of caffeine here because most of it's. Most people don't try to make it entertaining.
Yeah.
Instead, it's like finger wagging. Mm-hmm. And it's finger wagging with the same 400 different words of vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, can we freshen this up a little bit? Well, okay, but no. So I mean, no, it's good you try to be funny. And I mean, there's a lot of stories, a lot of times in articles where I've tried to be funny and I've looked back on that and said, oh, okay, what the hell, I tried. So,
well, that's the spirit. Well, one thing that I know I've taken heat for saying in the past, but I stand by it, and I dare anyone to prove me that I'm wrong. It's that the kind of people that you deal with, and I don't know if it makes me happy that you had a similar experience or sad that you had the experience at all, but that you can write an article critical of President left-wing number 1, and some people will cheer you, and you could write that exact same article, change the name of the president to a right-wing one, but be totally justified in criticizing the exact same subject material, and those same people will put a knife in your back. And what I've said is that all that tells me is the overwhelming majority of people don't have any principles. I've made the argument that if you're the kind of person that if I give you 10 different issues and you're having to think long and hard on what your position is on all 10 issues, that all that tells me is you don't have any principles guiding your judgment.
Well, I'm not sure if it's okay. There are some people who have no principles and are simply waiting to attack the other side and waiting to defend their side, no matter the issue. There are other people who are. It's not so much that they lack principles; it's that they haven't spent a lot of time thinking things through, and they trust what they read in the Washington Post or on some of the very slanted online sites on both sides. So I don't want to do a blanket condemnation, because some of these folks might watch your show or might read my articles, and then all of a sudden they might say, I had not thought of it like that, and looking at it a different way, then I can come around and see, okay, well, it might be that Trump is right on this issue and President Obama was right on that issue. So there are folks who are corrigible, and it's a challenge. Basically it's a challenge of triage, because there are some folks who will never be persuaded on anything and are going to hate you as soon as you disagree with them. You try to recognize those folks and not waste time on them. So
yeah. Now let's bring this full circle to close. We've talked about the us and the them. We've talked about I've talked about it's not my representative, it's everybody else's. Is all of that not just the perfect argument for why we need decentralization, and maybe even, and we're going to be called bad words, maybe the S word, maybe secession? Maybe it's better that people break things apart because maybe our differences are just not reconcilable.
That'd be a lot better than the Civil War. I mean, it didn't work out very well the first time.
You don't say.
But no, I mean, there's so much centralized power. There were a lot of good criticisms of the Supreme Court back when the Kavanaugh uproar was going on. That it's damned unfortunate that there's this basically hysteria around the Supreme Court nominee.
Sure.
And it's partly because the court has too much power. It's had too much power since Thomas Jefferson condemned it. So, but no, I mean, we'd be a whole lot better off if Washington wasn't running Americans' lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you one opportunity before I hit you with the last question. Is there anything you want to share with our audience? Upcoming articles, websites, links, anything you want to give us?
Websites, jimbovard.com. I'm starting to do a series of podcasts, basically funny stories. I posted one there this morning on my experience being interrogated in East Germany. When I was traveling there illegally, and I got caught with some papers and I shouldn't have had with me, and got interrogated for several hours, and people might get a laugh about how I bullshitted my way out of there.
Well, that sounds exactly like people who like the gold standard will love another program about people bullshitting their way through. So
there you go.
Yeah,
if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Jim, we're going to get you out of here with this one.
Okay.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
It depends on which state you're in.
That's the first time anyone's given us that.
Bratwurst, that's a good sandwich. I mean, if it's a chicken hot dog, no.
So, but you're saying that fundamentally it is classified as a sandwich, but you're more concerned with what's...
No. I would not say that a chicken hot dog is the moral equivalent of a good bratwurst.
We're into moral equivalency now on this question.
Wow.
Jim, we've asked basically every person who's been on this show this question. You're the first one to say it depends on what state you're in.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, hey, I'm trying to decentralize. Like you said.
Jim Bovard, thank you so much for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, remember to go to jimbovard.com so you can hear more of his stories. Hopefully less moral equivalency like that BS answer we got just now, and hopefully more interesting things. Jim,
thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Sir.
Guys, remember at home, Facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter is at Alan M. Mosley. It's at Jim Bovard, by the way, isn't it? On Twitter?
Yes, yeah.
At Jim
Bovard.
At Jim
It's
Bovard.
a French name.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering
it's French. It's Huguenot.
Oh. Well, there's the topic.
Okay. Folks don't know what Huguenots are, but that's okay.
Jim, can you just come on the next 10 weeks in a row and just hit
I hate to have a bad influence on your listeners.
Well, all 7 of them will be outraged. I have no doubt. And you don't have to do any of that because it's the goldstandardpodcast.com. Blake, anything else?
Yes, don't let the TSA touch your goods because, well, they screw everything up.
Okay, well that's good advice. Now that's my Thanksgiving turkey.
Yeah.
That's my Thanksgiving turkey.
That's his Thanksgiving.
That's going to be our new tagline.
What's your Thanksgiving turkey?
Thank you so much.
Stuffing of the turkey.
Yeah. See, this is taking a turn for the worse. So I'm going to cut everybody off right there by saying thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.